All right, so we got a start to our drawing with the ink background. So what I'm going to do now is show you how you can go back and build up on top of the inks to redefine things. What I like about the inks though is that everything is established. Notice what I'm doing. I'm using a Conte pencil. I really like Conte on top of the ink because it will stick down and it's easy to put other materials into the Conte. So what I want to do is I want to make this edge stand out from the background. So because I've got that ink wash that goes across both, I want to do a little bit on both of them to make one stand out and the other recede. So all I'm going to do is lightly come through here and make that stand out. What I'm going to do is just lightly fade that Conte in. And what you can see that does is makes a very nice subtle highlight on that edge. Now the other thing I want to do is push this back a little bit. I like this sort of ambiguous background, so I don't want to overdo this, but I definitely want to just lightly make a slightly darker background behind it. So look what I've done there. I've completely separated the object from the background. Look how much nicer and darker that got. And I'm just going to fade it out because I want it to kind of blend into this background. Now here's the other thing. The ebony pencil will get almost as dark as the ink, the darkest ink washes. So if you want to establish, like see how this gets a little weird next to the bottle? I don't want this edge of the background to flow along the bottle. So what I can do is come in with this and just sharpen that edge up. But look how nice and crisp that definition becomes. Also, when you're doing this, definitely think about whether you're using an HB, a 4B. So what you have to do is make a decision. Once you start to know the values of your pencils, you can make a decision. For this area, I don't want to go with a darker value. I want to go with a lighter value. So if I go with 4B, that's going to be fairly dark. So what I'm going to do is go with my HB. Because even if I press too hard, that HB is still going to be a lot lighter. So see what I'm doing? I'm just coming in here and sharpening up those edges and just very lightly. Now some artists like to leave these pencil marks. I see some, beautiful drawings where people just use those kind of marks to give a little bit of action to the surface. I like to blend things a little more. If I leave marks, it's only going to be in certain places. But look how easily, you saw in the first video how quickly I established this whole area. Now I'm having the fun of just going in and doing the parts of drawing that I really like to do, which is defining edges. Here's where I need to use my ruler again because I'm getting my measurements off. I tend to not have this problem as much when I'm standing up and drawing. When I'm sitting here and working flat, it seems like because of that receding, you actually get perspective here. So you have to be really careful that you don't make things look like they're, vanishing more than they should. So this is why when I'm working flat, I always have a ruler handy. It's just build this up a little bit, fade it in. On this side, I'm going to use my ebony to sharpen that edge up. Round it off. Maybe fade it in a little more here. So what I'm doing is I'm changing the pressure. As I'm pushing here, as I get close to the edge, I just press harder. And then I just fade up a little bit. So look how nicely I can get that subtle fade into the background, but keep that distinct edge along the definition of the form. And I think what I want to do, I really like the angle of this, so what I need to do is instead come back and make this one match. I think that's going to be a lot easier. That's much better. There we go. You can see by just this little bit of work that I've done in this area, look how much I've sharpened up that object. That ink wash was kind of a mess, but you got to know that you can come back and fix it. So that's what I want y'all to really focus on this drawing. You do not have to do as much ink wash as I did, but I definitely want you to understand how you establish a background in that very loose way and then come back and fix it. Look at what a mess I've made right here. What I want to do to make that top very crisp and a clean, sharp contrast is I'm going to just bring my ebony pencil and define that edge a little more. Fade it in, fade it in. And because I don't want this outline, see, this is what I was talking about before. See, right now I have too dark of an outline. This is a light to middle value object, and I've got a middle value to dark background, and that outline is too strong. So what I want to do is make the background and the outline connect so that it's no longer just an outline. It's now part of the background. But look how much cleaner that lid became. Now here's the other thing. If you bring in too much background, this is very organic. I've got all these really nice ambiguous organic forms going on with the ink, but when I start to color around, it just becomes this dark blotch. So what you want to do is look at areas, see what the inks kind of did over here, and then find a way to make that same thing happen. And if there are little ghostly hints over here of some organic patterns, make what you're adding follow those. So all of a sudden you have now, unified your shadows behind the object with the background. We don't ever want it just to look like we slapped a dark, blotch around it. So what I'm going to do again, I'm going to take my blending stump and blend this into the background because I want this part of the background that I'm adding to have the same visual quality as the rest of this. So that's what you want to think about as you're working. And for me, as an artist, this is what you should enjoy doing. If you're an artist, you should enjoy this sort of visual, it's like a game. You set up problems and then you solve them and you critically analyze what's going on and then you find ways to improve what you're doing. So I've got these kind of sweeps here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come back here and add a little bit more Conte. And because I've got those sweeps going on, this is one of those times that, I told you don't blend with your finger, but I'm not blending too much oils in. I just want to try to get that same movement. But look how these sort of cloud-like forms I'm starting to play with. And that's what you have to do as an artist. You have to sit here and look at the overall, and I am squinting. Y'all can't see that on here, but I'm keep squinting to look at it to see how the contrast showing up in the areas that I'm working. I let this kind of droop down. So what I want to do, I have to decide now. Right here, I wanted that to be a light edge against the dark background. I wanted this contrast to be secondary to the contrast of the bottle. I wanted this to be like a secondary dominant contrast, and then this to be one. But because that's a curve, I have to decide which can I pull off for that clean edge. Is it going to be easier to take bring the dark background and sharpen it up, or is it going to work okay to use my Conte? This side I'm going to bring the background down with the graphite, and on the other side I'll use the Conte. Make sure I get it crisp all the way across. And same thing up here. Now I'm going to go with my ebony because of how dark that is. I'm going to come in here and just make this edge a little darker. I want it to be a lot darker at this edge. And then I'll come in and just blend that in. So I'm going to blend this in the same way so that visually the parts I add match up to the parts that were already there. So look how nice this starts to be. I have completely clarified that boundary and straightened up that horizon line. So over here I added the Conte, but what I want to do is come in and make that background look believably connected. That's about what I want. Now I don't like this angle here of this edge, so what I want to do is just break that up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just make some of this come in. And this is the other thing that's nice, the woodless graphite, if you turn it sideways, look how I'm getting kind of that ambiguous texture. So let's just blend it in a little more. So notice how breaking up that line, it's not as distracting as it was because that was competing with the other area. So I want my eye to come into here. So these are the things I want you to think about as you're working with this process. This is the game of making art. This is where you start really playing with how do you create a believable unified drawing when you've started with one material and start working with others. Just because I want y'all to see this. Look how fun it is to come in here and define these boundaries. Y'all could see how messed up those boundaries looked. But I'm just going to come in here and put this dark edge below the bottle, and it's doing two things. It's totally making that bottle separate from the background. It defined that bottle as a consistent form that's standing out, but having the shadow here also unified it because it made it look believably connected to the surface. So it did two things at once just by defining that boundary along the bottom. And now what I'm doing is just making a fade in from those from that edge because I don't want it to be an outline. I want it to look like it's part of the surface here. So look how nicely that totally connected the bottle to the surface and made it stand out. That's why I like drawing. Look how, and if you squint and look at it, you can really see that glow starting to happen. And that's why I did the inks the way I did, because I wanted to have that kind of luminosity come through. Let me try to get that to unify with the background a bit. Where's my 6B? There it is. Now, because the bottle does refract that background a little bit, that's why I'm making a curve here, but I'm not going to bring that curve all the way to the edge. So there we go. And let me use a piece of chalk here. I want to sharpen up this boundary a little bit. So I'm going to just use my chalk to kind of sharpen up that edge, sharpen up that edge. So see, even if you use chalk, the problem is chalk doesn't hold its place. So if you're going to do any blending, you have to be very, very subtle blending into the chalk. So all I'm going to do is just sharpen this edge up a little, fade it into the background. And there we go. Look at that. Hope that helps. Hope that gives you all an idea of how much more efficient you can be getting drawings started if you use inks.